Halo Combat Evolved revolutionized the first-person shooter genre and brought FPS to the home console market. Halo 2 brought online multiplayer and Xbox Live to the masses. Halo 3 cemented Halo's legacy and brought about the rise of competitive multiplayer. After Halo 3 we got ODST, a kind of DLC running on the Halo 3 engine. Then Reach, which expanded on the wider Halo universe and went back and explored some of the backstory and setup to the entire trilogy, and acted as a prequel to the original games. In my opinion, it was pretty clear to see that Bungie was already losing interest in developing Halo games as early as Halo 3. The story wasn't as gripping as the first two games, and it was obvious this game was made to wrap up the Halo story with a neat little bow on top. The reason a lot of people feel this way is because Halo 3's story feels like a means to an end, a necessary evil. Bungie needed to wrap up the Halo trilogy in order to move on to making games they wanted to make. This feeling is exacerbated by ODST feeling like a glorified DLC that costs $60 for a repackaged Halo 3. This feeling isn't quite as present with Reach though. Bungie went all out with experimenting with new game mechanics and gameplay. They didn't care that much about how Reach would be remembered after leaving the franchise reins to 343. A new company formed by Microsoft to continue development of the Halo games. The confidence that went into the development of Reach, Bungie's farewell and love letter to the franchise, the desire to try new things that made Halo feel fresh was apparent and played on the same kind of risk mentality they had when developing earlier titles. This was what made the original Halo titles so great. They took risks, from Halo 1's switch from a third-person to first-person perspective late in development and bringing the game to console, a platform that had not yet been a proven fit for FPS games. Halo 2 suffered from a rushed development that still shows in the finished product today, but the Arbiter missions, while not my personal favorite, were a huge step in terms of innovating storytelling, allowing us a closer look at the Covenant and seeing it through the eyes of an elite during one of the most crucial moments during a civil war. I love when games take risks, because even when they don't fully pay off, the effects of said risks are felt in the industry for years to come. Games like Far Cry 2's brutal, unforgiving world might feel frustrating by today's standards, but as an example of an early open world game, this title does marvels at creating an immersive and beautiful African savanna for players to explore and roam in an open-ended way. And don't even get me started on the fire physics. So why the hell am I talking about Far Cry 2 in my Halo Infinite review? Well, I'm simply using it and past Halo games as an example for the good kind of risk that developers can take when making games. And even when that risk doesn't fully pay off and people remember your game as a frustrating mess where vehicles chase you down at light speed or jackal snipers that can kill you in less than a split second flat, there is something unique and memorable about these experiences because you knew the developers were going for something, even if they didn't fully achieve their goals. When Halo 4 came out, it felt jarring. Halo 3's ending felt like such a conclusive one. Yet, the legendary ending still left opportunity for the story of the Master Chief to be continued, but any potential that Bungie left 343 to build upon was quickly squandered. A new mysterious Forerunner planet is thrown to the wayside as we are quickly introduced to the Didact, throwing away any and all mystery surrounding the Forerunners that the original games had spent so long building up. Chief himself, who has a completely new set of armor and an even bustier Cortana than we left off with in Halo 3, was now made out to be an emotional character with his own thoughts and feelings rather than an empty Ghost-in-the-Shell type character he was in previous games. What 343 fails on the most with Halo 4's campaign though is the mystery and mystique surrounding the Forerunners. You could do so much with the setup of Halo 3's legendary ending, but instead we get whatever this freaky looking motherfucker is.
The Forerunners have returned.
Halo 4's art style sure as hell didn't help selling this world either. To be honest with you though, Halo 4's campaign isn't even that bad, and I think for it having been 343's first fully fledged first-person shooter video game they ever developed, they did a pretty decent job with it. at least from a gameplay perspective. Halo 4 is not a great Halo game, but it's a solid first-person sci-fi shooter. Halo 4 is not an indie game, but you can't expect the studio as new as 343 was to make a masterpiece right off the bat. But that doesn't help with the fact that this is a Halo game, and it feels disconnected from the rest of the franchise in terms of overall narrative. 343's biggest mistake was continuing the Master Chief story with their first outing into the franchise. If Halo 4 was a spin-off game featuring the same gameplay and some obvious adjustments in terms of story, where we play as some new, never-before-seen Spartan, I think this game's fan and public perception would have been a lot different today. But instead, we get a prime example of 343's inexperience to show for it, and a blunderance of the previously flawless Master Chief storyline. With the release of Halo 5 and a doubling down on muddling Master Chief's story, the once untouchable OG trilogy had now been tainted with the misdirected and misguided entries in the Reclaimer saga. It's hard to tell who Master Chief was at this point, and what exactly his character goals and motivations were. He almost acted as a more powerful version of a Marine in the earlier games. As the games progressed, he became this almost godlike figure though, an untouchable super soldier, almost akin to the likes of Kratos from a God of War game, or Thor from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think Halo Infinite is a game that struggles greatly with the identity of the Halo franchise as a whole, not just from the perspective of the Master Chief, but in terms of gameplay, art style, and narrative. It tries to pull together 2 decades worth of games while trying to make compromises to please different parts of the fractured Halo fanbase while doing so, and for the most part, it does succeed at being a good middle ground. I don't think by any means Halo Infinite is a bad game. The story is average, the gameplay is fun, and the art style is quite nice. Halo Infinite is a culmination of years of an identity crisis, however, and much like myself, even after our teenage years, we're still trying to figure out exactly who we are. The dissonance between the original games and 343's titles is clear, and the fracturing of the fanbase with each subsequent release doesn't help. Outside of the fact that the game tells us we're playing as a green Spartan named Master Chief, there is almost no similarities in how the game plays, looks, feels, or approaches storytelling. Heck, even the weapons sharing the same names as ones from previous titles are functionally and artistically different from their predecessors. I'm a strong believer that each Halo game since the original has been a downgrade campaign-wise. In terms of gameplay and story, Halo CE was the strongest at nailing all aspects of the experience. Halo 2 nailed the story and even surpassed the original in that department, but failed at gameplay. Halo 3 felt like a more complete package, but just doesn't feel like anything new or fresh, leading it to feel more safe and calculated than either previous title. Reach was a step in the right direction, we got to explore a new planet, and we get a narratively gripping story about sacrifice and failure. But sadly, this was the last Halo campaign that would be a step up from the last, as things would continue on a downward trend from here on out. Halo has always gone hand in hand with Xbox. Halo may have made Xbox and might be the only reason it ever became a household name, heck even exists today, but Xbox is important to Halo 2. What makes a game that's developed for one input type and one platform so great is that the developers can really fine-tune the gameplay, on top of the fact that they can suck every ounce of juice out of the hardware they are developing the game for. Just look at the difference between Halo 3 and 4 graphically. Sure, 3's art style is better, but in terms of visuals, 4 takes the cake in terms of detail, lighting, and texture quality. This alone proves my point. The 360's power was pushed to its absolute limits with Halo 4, but that leads us to Halo Infinite. Halo Infinite is a game that is fundamentally being held back by decade-old hardware. It has to be able to run on the original Xbox One that came out all the way back in 2013, while simultaneously being developed for Xbox Series S and X, on top of PC and every single possible combination of graphics card and processing power that comes with that platform, not to mention 2 different versions of Windows and 2 different game launchers. That's a lot to ask of a company that's coming off the back of Halo 5, a game that was developed for one platform in mind, with one input type in mind, for hardware that was released in 2013. To ask a company that only has 2 fully fledged games under their belt to make a multi-platform cross-play game is absolutely ludicrous, and considering how well Halo Infinite performs and plays even after the year delay, it's a miracle that this game isn't a complete dumpster fire. A lot of people complain about Forge, file share, and worst of all, campaign split screen and online co-op not being included in Infinite at launch, but the truth is, we traded these features for the multi-platform release. We traded them for crossplay, and we traded them for a borderline downgraded Far Cry style open world that doesn't even feel half as memorable as Far Cry 5's open world, which was the weakest in the series, maybe aside from New Dawn. So what exactly does all this mean? There's honestly so much to talk about with Infinite, and so much to say that I'm having trouble wrapping my head around it while writing this script. You've got the shitty in-game microtransactions, which is obviously a result of Halo going free to play. You've got a sparse selection of game modes to choose from at launch, a lackluster customization consisting of repackaged armor from Halo Reach, a game that came out a decade ago, and to top it all off, there's no service record or progression system to speak of. This is clearly an unfinished game, and when it comes to the direction this game's campaign takes, it feels misguided, confused, and rushed. When I saw this trailer for Halo Infinite's open world campaign back in 2018, I was absolutely hyped, because coming off the back of Breath of the Wild, a next-gen open world Halo game felt like an exciting new direction for 343 to be taking the series. Granted, this trailer was nothing more than a glorified tech demo featuring wildlife and biomes that would never appear in the final game. It almost confuses me that it was never made clear from the get-go that this was nothing more than a tech demo. You could have made it clear just by putting some text before or after the demo clearly stating this is a tech demo. You'd clear up 90% of people's confusion with this trailer. It's almost like 343 retroactively decided this pre-rendered smoke and mirrors trailer wasn't going to be what the final product was gonna look like. A next-gen Halo game was what I was expecting with Infinite. I was expecting this game to be exclusive to the Xbox Scorpio, now known as the Xbox Series X, and I was expecting this game to be groundbreaking in terms of graphics and rendering distance due to the newly introduced Slipspace engine. We were promised so much with the Slipspace engine. It was supposed to be easier and more wieldy for the developers to work with, making it easier for them to push out content faster. So tech demo aside, I don't think it was too much to expect the final product to at least look similar or on par in terms of rendering and graphics compared to the demo. But in reality, what we now know years later is that Slipspace, the engine heralded as the next big thing in gaming, that was going to be so amazing that even other Xbox game studios might start using it to develop their own games, turned out to be yet another version of the old Blam engine, and apparently development of Slipspace was heavily outsourced to third-party contractors. Yet again, cementing the fact that in reality 343 had no idea what they were doing when they promised so much with Slipspace. All that talk about it being the greatest thing since sliced bread was all marketing speak. It's clear that there wasn't a lot of planning ahead when it came to development of Halo Infinite, because even after 6+ years of development time between Halo 5 and Infinite, 343 was still rushing to the finish line to get this game out the door. It really makes you wonder just exactly what was going on internally at 343, pretty much since the beginning of them taking over the reins of the Halo franchise. And just for the record, this is not a dig at 343 and the people internally there. I'm sure the developers that work there are all nice people, and they deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. This is more directed at the company as a whole, because if the company is dysfunctional itself, no amount of skilled or kind people are going to make a difference. If you have an army of clones of Jesus Christ who all have a degree in game development making the next Halo game, if management up top is bad, there's always going to be a problem. So in terms of whose fault the mistakes and missteps when it comes to 343's Halo games over the years falls to, I think it's time for people to start turning their heads to those behind the management behind 343, as well as the Microsoft execs making some of the decisions behind the scenes. The truth of the matter is unfortunate though. 343 was founded simply for one reason and one reason alone, to capitalize on the Halo franchise, and nothing is ever going to change that. Bungie made Halo out of passion and a love for the game. This is why I believe every game post Halo 2 just doesn't feel as impactful as the originals. It's due to the fact that even Bungie themselves wanted to move on from the franchise, but Halo was Microsoft's cash cow in the gaming space. And it was, and still clear, that they are never going to stop making Halo games as long as it makes them money. That's not to say Bungie didn't have passion making the games post 1 and 2, but it definitely showed that it was waning by the time they got to Reach. This can be looked at in several different ways. As long as Microsoft is making money from the Halo series, fans are always going to have new games to play, and as a fan of any franchise, it's always nice to have something new to experience, even if that thing isn't that great. The fact that a franchise is still ongoing is sometimes better than it not, and that alone is enough to keep people coming back. But it doesn't mean it's ever going to get back to the quote-unquote glory days. It's a sad cycle that happens to a lot of movies and games. A lot of the time monopolies form around certain properties, leading companies to milk these franchises for all they are worth, while simultaneously keeping eyes off of and stepping on the toes of the little guy who might actually be making the next big thing. On the other hand, there's something comfortable about established franchises. You always know what you're going to get. If you know you like Far Cry games, hey, guess what? You're probably going to like the new Far Cry game. You might not love it, but it's just enough to keep you entertained. And if it's above the rest of the cut, it might even put a smile on your face. Unfortunately, far too many games these days take the easy route. They play it safe. Risks are dangerous and franchise killing if things go wrong. Playing it safe is the way to go if you're looking to make money. If it's worked before, it'll work again. Simultaneously, taking too many risks combined with carelessness has you end up with a game like Halo 5. Again, if this was following only Fireteam Osiris and simply focused on a new group of Spartans, I think this game would have been received very differently. 343's biggest mistake was not learning how to make Halo games before picking up the mantle of responsibility. Chief is one of the most iconic characters in all of gaming, and the Halo franchise is nothing short of legendary. If it's not a spin-off game, you cannot fuck it up. Imagine if they took the time, made a couple spin-off games, and then after learning what they could do, unique compared to Bungie, and figuring out what fans like in their Halo games, imagine then, after all those years of letting Master Chief sit dormant, you'd have fans wondering what happened to him, speculations and theories about Halo 3's legendary ending lasting a decade, and then after years of radio silence from the big green man, boom, you drop an E3 trailer announcing the next Halo game. Master Chief is back. Halo Infinite's story is confused because it's not only trying to make amends for the last decade of half-assed and shoehorned in plot points from 4 and 5, but it's also trying to introduce the Chief to a new generation of gamers who are juiced up on G Fuel and have been playing Fortnite for the last 5 years. Little Jimmy has never met the Master Chief, and he doesn't give a fuck about him or this little blue lady that talks to him. What's so confusing about Infinite's plot, though, is that it appeals heavily to old fans and drops a lot of nostalgia bait, making it seem like this game is not made for little Jimmy's enjoyment, but rather a respectful return to form for older fans who have been following the Halo series for years. But instead of an elaboration of the events that took place between Halo 5 and Infinite, we get the safest, most PG story ever in a Halo game. The opening cutscene screams fan service with a big battle between Master Chief and Atriox. Hell, I love this guy. I even have a shirt with him on it. And you know what? I'll give them credit. This cutscene is pretty awesome, but this cutscene is short-lived and doesn't deserve to be in the game, because this isn't one of those cutscenes like the zoom out from Noble Six's helmet in Halo Reach. It's not an omen of what's to come, only to flash back to the ending of Halo 5 and catch us up on the events between the two games. It's not an awesome setup for a lengthy campaign where there's a huge build-up over the course of dozens of hours, listening to Chief and the pilot grapple, no pun intended, with the fact that Chief lost to Atriox once, in which he's legitimately fearful of facing him again, not because he fears death, but because he fears if he loses, all of humanity lays in the balance, the weight of the galaxy resting on his shoulders. No, this cutscene is nothing more than fan service to get little Jimmy at half chub while he eats Doritos and drinks Mountain Dew and diddles the tip of his wiener while watching Ubernick live on Twitch. I can practically hear him say, "Look, mommy, it's Atriox. He's from Halo Wars 2. I haven't played that one, but I've watched the cutscenes." Don't worry, little Jimmy. I haven't played Halo Wars 2 either. This kind of fan service is not directed at longtime fans though. This is the kind of fan service directed at fans below the age of 15 who are the ones watching Ubernick live on Twitch, watching him do the "no way dude" face while tearing up at Spartan Griffin's death, a character which we met less than 5 minutes ago.
That's good. Good.
Chief,
Respond, please. You find the source of
You think this is funny?
whatever's down there, either
And there it
come
is.
with us or be left behind. Can you hear me?
First time I've ever cried at a video game.
You know a franchise is dead when someone says something like, "I cried when Iron Man died at the end of Avengers, but cried even harder when Black Widow died." This fan not only has the emotional capacity of a 10-year-old, but cried over the death of a character that had previously only been in Marvel films purely as a side character, and has had no character development since the sex scene with the Incredible Hulk. Why did I write this? I didn't cry when Iron Man died, and there is a legitimate argument that even his death is unearned, but he actually had a solid character arc over the course of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We saw his character grow and change, and whether or not that growth was consistent across the films is debatable, but one thing is for sure, at least they tried. When people cry over every Marvel movie and praise it regardless of whether it was good or bad is a fan that is blinded by their own fandom. This kind of fan certainly exists in the Halo fandom. Another kind of fan though is the kind that is stuck in the old days or won't give up old ways or accept change. If only they would stop making Marvel movies and go back to making only paper comics like back in my day. If only they got rid of Sprint, things would instantly be better. These are both fallacies, and it doesn't matter how good an old thing is or was, you're never going to be able to have that feeling replicated. We have nostalgia for things we love, and I think I've accepted that myself recently when it comes to Halo and video games in general. It's an unfortunate thing when you've grown up with a franchise, only for that franchise to either outgrow you or you to outgrow it. Or maybe it just simply stops being relevant. The hype is gone. The glory days are over. It will never be in its prime again. I think every franchise out there has the potential to get back to its glory days, but I think it's a very difficult feat for companies to weigh the longevity of a franchise when faced with the mountains of cash they could be making in the short term. God of War is a great example of a game that brought back one of the most legendary game franchises into the mainstream. And while I'm sure there are many fans of the old God of War games who think the new God of War is nothing more than a linear game chock full of cutscenes made to appeal to the average Joe, but believe it or not, God of War is actually a masterpiece in terms of a reboot. It was able to introduce an entirely new audience to Kratos and pleased a sizable portion of the old school fan base while doing so. Heck, I don't even own a PlayStation personally or enjoy the style of third-person linear story game that regularly comes out on the platform. But heck, even I borrowed a PS4 from my dad just to play this bad boy, and I enjoyed every second of it. Doom is another example of a masterful reboot, painstakingly developed by Hugo Martin and his incredibly talented team over at id Software. They simultaneously revitalized a thought-to-be-dead franchise and brought it back from the grave and into the forefront of gaming, and even brought some new innovations to the FPS genre, once again proving that Doom is a staple of FPS games and that it has staying power. Doom Eternal only expanded and doubled down on the things that made Doom 2016 great, turning things up a notch by cranking up the gameplay to 11.
The numbers all go to 11. Look, right across the board.
11,
Oh, I see.
11,
And most of
11,
the
and then
amps go up to 10.
Exactly.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
What does Halo Infinite do as a reboot, though? It's a confusing mess, and it's clear that it has an identity crisis. It's too wrapped up in trying to please too many segments of the fractured fanbase, on top of trying to please new audiences that are going to be playing Halo for the very first time through Game Pass. It's especially confusing because Halo Infinite clearly wants to be a game made for old school fans in terms of story. The story is not easily digestible from a new player's perspective. You need to know the lore to figure out what's happening in this game, and you need to have played Halo 5 to understand what's going on. This is confirmed by a good friend of mine, Luke, whose first ever Halo game was Infinite. This is one of the areas Infinite succeeds in, which is bringing in new players. So new players don't understand what's going on in the story, but in terms of pleasing old players, I don't know about Ubernick and his fan base of 343 Yes Men, but I am certainly not pleased as a longtime fan. What the fuck actually happened between Halo 5 and Infinite? This was one of my most anticipated aspects of Infinite, the story. I was really hoping for something that would blow me away, no pun intended. Bring all the pieces of the Reclaimer saga together in at least a somewhat satisfying manner. I wasn't even hoping for something as good as The Rise of Skywalker and remedying the absolute blunderfuck of a story Rian Johnson left for J.J. Abrams to clean up. No, I wasn't even expecting something as satisfying as that. I was expecting a fairly average story that touches on plot points built up over the course of the Reclaimer saga and explain a few inconsistencies along the way. Simple stuff really, not rocket science. But what I did not expect was 343 to completely ignore everything they set up in 4 and 5. What happened to the Librarian's Gift? Where did that plot point go? What happened to the Prometheans between 5 and Infinite? What happened during the Created War and the conflict between humanity and Cortana? What's the UNSC up to outside of random Marines chilling on Zeta Halo? How's Earth doing? Have the forces on the ring lost contact with Earth? Or has humanity on Earth been completely decimated? Are you meaning to tell me these few Marines on Zeta Halo are all that's left of humanity? I doubt it, but you've got to be kidding me if that is the case. It's a real shame because 343 had an opportunity to make an epic Halo story with all the factions they built up over the course of the Reclaimer saga. Interesting plot threads are brought up throughout the course of Infinite's story too though, like how the Banished are stuck on Zeta Halo.
Triox is dead! It is his fault that we are stuck here!
Why can't the Banished leave the ring? What's keeping them from leaving? Is it perhaps a Guardian? None of this is addressed in game, however, and yet another opportunity to do something interesting with the story is squandered. Why are there flood silexes on Zeta Halo? How did Atriox survive the explosion at the beginning of the game, with everyone thinking he's dead? I'm well aware some of these are plot points and Easter eggs that have been left as unanswered for 343 to elaborate on in future DLCs they plan to release for Infinite, or maybe even future Halo games depending on how long Infinite's actual lifespan lasts. These cliffhangers wouldn't irk me as much as they do though if the story that appeared in the actual game was even half-baked. But what we got was a bunch of nothing. I have even more questions after playing Infinite than before, and after 6 years of blue balls, it's especially disheartening to be told you have to wait even longer to find out what happened in your favorite game franchise, or maybe even never. I could go on and talk about how I think it's lazy that the new AI is basically just a repeat of Cortana, but with a slightly different personality. But by the end of the game, her voice started to sound more confident, making her seem more and more like the old Cortana we know and love anyway. And I mean, that ending scene where she picks her name, and it's heavily suggested that she's just going to be called Cortana again, has got to be one of the lamest endings in any Halo game ever. Even Halo 4's ending is preferable to this, and I didn't give a rat's fuck about the soap opera between Chief and Cortana. Now that I've got all that ranting about the story off my chest, let's move on to gameplay, and why I think Halo Infinite is a more boring version of what Far Cry has already become. The actual gunplay, shooting, walking up to a group of enemies, how the enemies react to you, using equipment, specifically the grapple hook, on and around enemies is all great. It's not as fast paced as Doom Eternal, and it's not as slow as more classic shooters, but instead it resides in this weird middle ground. I don't think the combat loop is bad by any means. I just kinda wish they would commit to just one style of gameplay and stick with it. This game's combat loop could be as frenetic and balls to the wall as Doom Eternal's, but the devs were clearly not confident going that route, so what about slower, more methodical gameplay that's honestly just as valid as more movement-based shooters? Well, this is kind of middle of the road too, as it doesn't feel like it fully commits to the old school slower FPS feel. It probably falls more to the slower side, and it's going to feel better going into encounters without sprinting or going bananas with the grapple hook like I did. But it just feels odd having both these options, and I think it makes the gameplay worse for it. I can't quite put my finger on why. Maybe it's because I want to play the game more like a mobility shooter.
It's a disability mobility!
And the game has systems in place for that, but would rather me play it like a classic Halo? I don't know. But I'll tell you what is not fun. Going around the world, picking up audio logs.
I've spotted Escherum's audio log. Let me grab that.
Picking up audio logs and clearing banished outposts. I was watching a Halo YouTuber, I can't quite remember who it was, it might have been Green Skull, but this person actually said out loud that they were glad that Halo Infinite's open world wasn't anything like Far Cry, because Far Cry games are full of filler content. I have to break it to you, but as number 6 in the world on the Far Cry leaderboard on True Achievements, I have to tell you, you're wrong. Halo Infinite's open world is far more vapid and empty than any Far Cry game. Specifically, the modern Far Cry games have some of the weakest open worlds in that franchise, and even those open worlds, maybe with the exception of New Dawn, are far more interesting than Halo Infinite's and full of more worthwhile content. And that's really saying something, because I didn't know an open world could get much more vapid than Far Cry 5. Far Cry 5 feels like a jungle gym full of delicious candy compared to Infinite's open world. Halo Infinite's open world is one flat biome with no variation in terrain, trees, or lakes. It just serves as one big map full of filler content like the mini-bosses, if you can even call them that, and the banished outposts to be taken, which, may I remind you, are far less interesting than Far Cry 5's already uninteresting outposts. It's a real shame this open world took so much development time away from the linear campaign, because in comparison to the open world, the linear sections are just as vapid and samey looking. If I had to describe this game's linear missions in 3 words, I'd say blue metal corridors. I played this game 4 times, once on heroic, once on legendary with all skulls on, once on easy to pick up a skull I missed because a game that came out 10 years after Halo 3 doesn't have a mission select, and once on normal to capture footage for this video. And even after playing the game 4.5 times, this game's campaign is so unmemorable. All I remember from my playthroughs are blue hallways, doors, more hallways, and doors, with an occasional power seed needed to be picked up to open a door. Remember with the old Halo games how each individual mission stood out in its own unique way, like the Scarab battle on Crow's Nest, or the Flood level where you play as the Arbiter, or heck, even a weak-ass level like the Library from Halo 1 is far more interesting and memorable than any mission in Halo Infinite. Probably the most memorable mission in Halo Infinite is this level, which I think we'll call the Hexagon Factory, because this is where the Ring 3D prints pieces to rebuild itself. And then we grapple up a couple of hexagons and fight this robot dude for the 2nd time, who is honestly probably my favorite boss in the entire game because he's the only non-humanoid boss, and he's got weak points, kind of like a certain other shooter, almost as if 343 could make more enemies with weak Nah, never mind, that would never work, that would be too much fun. If you look away from the linear metal corridors for a second though and look at the cutscenes for a second, you'll notice that the majority of this game's runtime is walking up to a pedestal, inserting a chip, listening to Cortana talk for 5 minutes and ooh! But in all seriousness, staring at Cortana 2 for hours on end is not fun or interesting. It gets old after the third time you walk up to a pedestal and put her in. It legitimately scares me that this game's story is getting so much praise online, because the majority of it is filler fan service that doesn't go anywhere, plays it safe, and does very little to explain what happened between the last two entries. What a missed opportunity to really do anything. In 5 or 6 years, when a no-clip documentary releases about this game describing the development woes the team over at 343 went through due to mismanagement, COVID, and post-Halo 5 PTSD, I would be very surprised if it didn't come out that a lot of the complaints I just made about this game are due to an extremely rushed development. Slipspace, from what I understand, wasn't ready until 2018. This gave 343 2 years in between 2018 and 2020 to finish Infinite, and clearly that didn't go the way they planned, so it wouldn't surprise me if the entire game was whipped up in the course of less than 3 years. Not surprising considering the amount of compromises and lack of content that exist in the game today. And for a development cycle of 3 years, and how graphically impressive this game can be in terms of visual fidelity and detail, they did a pretty good job at getting this game out the door. So props for that, 343. On January 13th, 2022, the legacy Halo 360 servers closed their doors for good. Microsoft pulled the plug and gamers jumped online one last time to relive the glory days. Some people were excited to see if they could become a modern day version of the Noble 14. And then, late at night, it happened. Players got disconnected, the servers were closed. For good. Halo fans are a very particular and picky group of gamers. I don't know another fan base that takes their games quite as seriously as Halo fans do. At times it almost seems like some people have made a religion out of it. Heck, I've just spent 2.5 hours sat on my ass writing this script. But that's exactly what makes Halo fans unique. It's our passion, and our passion drives this game series. During the Bungie era, Bungie's passion was what made the original trilogy so great, and we felt their passion, which made us passionate, and in turn we fed off each other's passion. That's why even though Bungie didn't want to continue making Halo games, they never phoned it in. They never compromised. They were just as passionate about the franchise and universe they had created as us fans were. And by the end, when they had no more passion left to give, and left to go to Activision to make Destiny, they left behind the incredible community they had spent years cultivating. Bungie was no longer passionate about Halo, but fans certainly were, and when the mantle got passed on to 343, things went downhill fast, because 343 as a company was never passionate about Halo. In fact, Microsoft went as far as to hire people who hated Halo to work on Halo 4. In order to cater more towards their target Call of Duty audience they were so focused on bringing into the fold. Many of those initial people who didn't care about Halo have since left 343 and moved on entirely, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Microsoft's impatience to make money and cash in on Halo, combined with 343's inexperience, resulted in something awful. Not necessarily Halo 4 itself, I mean. As I've stated before, I actually quite enjoy this game to some degree. But what resulted in the years to come was awful. The disastrous launch of MCC destroying fans' goodwill with the company, taking them years to rebuild trust. And to this day, many people have not yet forgiven them. Questionable decisions like how 343 chose Gearbox's lackluster PC port of the original Combat Evolved to be the one that CE Anniversary ran on, and in turn the MCC port. Was this a lazy decision, or simply for reasons we may never know? It can't be that hard to port an OG Xbox game to modern consoles. We practically see it happen every other day as new ones keep popping up on Game Pass all the time. What's particularly strange about many of the decisions 343 have made over the years is that some of them just seem so obvious and simple, like, bro, just take your time. Trust me, we've waited 6 years. We can wait a little longer. This leads me to guess that a lot of the issues with the company we've seen pop up in the past and repeated again with Halo Infinite can only be the result of one of two things: a lack of caring and laziness, or a lack of planning. What's so strange about all this is that 343 continues to make these mind-boggling decisions, like how they recently closed the original servers. There are clearly people still playing on these servers, because from what I've seen online, there is a very vocal community of players who wanted 343 to keep these open. Not only for the sake of little Timmy's enjoyment, whose only joy in life is coming home from school to play Halo Reach on his older brother's Xbox 360 because it's the only thing he can afford, and it allows him to forget about his neglectful parents and kids who bully him at school, if only for a short while, but also for the sake of game preservation, which is arguably the more important one. As one of the people who played Halo during its final hours, I can tell you unequivocally, this version of Halo Reach is completely different from the Halo Reach we see in MCC. The hit registration just isn't the same, nor is the way the game feels, nor is the hardcore sweaty PC aimbotters who you get matched up with on MCC. Reach 360 is a much more casual experience than MCC. It's a bunch of people playing a game they love for the sake of playing it, not because they need to reach a certain amount of credits to unlock a piece of armor in a battle pass. This sentiment has been echoed by other prominent members of the Halo community, like Hidden Xperia and Mint Blitz, both stating that after playing Halo 3 on 360 and going back to it on MCC, it just doesn't play the same. So let me get this straight, 343. You have a community of incredibly passionate players who want to play a set of games that weren't even developed by you, and you decide to sunset the servers? That's nice. Thanks, 343. Glad I can get clapped on by keyboard and mouse players in MCC while I'm trying to have a social game night with friends. Cool. My point bringing this whole thing up is that questionable decisions have been made and continue to be made. In conclusion, Halo Infinite feels like a compromise. It compromises on gameplay, it compromises on story, it compromises on store prices, and now it compromises on identity, one of the remaining core pillars of the Halo franchise. Remember how I said the same guns exist in Halo 5 as in Halo 1, but they don't play the same? Well, that's exactly what maintaining an identity is. It's bringing back old guns with the same names and same style, even if they don't look the same, for the sake of consistency. Halo Infinite doesn't even have consistency, because it throws everything out the window, the baby out with the bathwater. Any confidence 343 had when making Halo 5 and choosing to go the enhanced mobility route is gone. Now Spartan abilities? That was ballsy. You doubled down on your principles, and I can respect that. A lot of people didn't like Halo 5's gameplay, and that's down to personal preference. But at least they had courage when making it. At least they had hope. Unlike Halo Infinite.